My name's Robert Yanis Jr., and I'm the fastest man alive. Okay, well, maybe not the fastest man alive. Actually, I'm not really fast at all. Maybe the fastest podcast. No, I'm not the fastest podcaster either. Maybe the fuck it. Let's just start the show. Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast. This is Rob. On this episode, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on the long-awaited crossover musical episode of The Flash and Supergirl on the CW. But before I get to that, I want to share first my thoughts on Game of Thrones. You may have heard of this show. It's a little known series. Been on a couple years, whatever. But Kai and I finally started watching this. About a couple months ago, maybe a few weeks ago, I'd say, because we have a newborn, or I guess an infant now at the house, and we're not able to really run through shows as much as we would like. So we finally got around to watching Game of Thrones season 1, and just after years of people saying, "Oh, you don't watch Game of Thrones? You should watch Game of Thrones," friends and family and all of that. We just figured, you know what, maybe we should just watch it so we can at least be up to date on the series before it ends, since it does have, bio reports, a couple seasons left, a couple abbreviated seasons left before HBO calls it quits. So, of course, going into it, I knew way more about the story than I should have, including the shocking death in the finale. Fuck it, Ned Stark dies. That's not a spoiler 6 years later. He loses his head and then ends up on a spike. So I found the storyline overall pretty engaging. Didn't know the details of a lot of it. I had the broad strokes. I knew that Joffrey was going to end up king. I knew Ned Stark was going to die. I knew something with Daenerys and dragons and sort of the general direction of things, but not the details of everything. And I certainly didn't know the full extent of the ensemble cast and the seemingly dozens of characters that happen on that show. It really helps to watch this with subtitles just because there are so many names that are referenced, some of which are talked about way before you even meet them. I know Tywin Lannister is one example of that. We finally get Charles Dance showing up as him. I think maybe it's like episode 7-ish. It's at least midway through the season. So the plot moves so fast that sometimes it's difficult to keep track of everyone. So Kai and I often be like, wait, what's going on? Who's this guy? Oh, okay, got it. Having to sort of consult with each other to make sure we're both on the same page with that. But it has an interesting sort of Arthurian style going on amid all the sex and extreme violence that remind you that you are watching something that's clearly made for HBO and not traditional network television. I mean, decapitated horses, people eating hearts. There's like hardcore doggy style sex scenes. Not hardcore because let's not go there. But it's like very spirited sex scenes. Let's go there with it. But of course, the tone that they're trying to go for, which to me, when the show was first announced and when I first started seeing promos for it and that kind of thing, it did seem very Lord of the Rings-esque to me, albeit on a much more adult level. The involvement of dragons and fantasy elements, as well as Sean Bean, it probably didn't help with that comparison. But I think that now, having seen the show, it does really create its own niche, and it makes a lot of sense why it has become such a phenomenon. Because there is nothing like it on television right now, and in the realm of fantasy or elsewhere, it's at a very... It basically has the market cornered as far as that kind of storytelling. The acting was strong across the board. My two favorites, and Freddie mentioned when I told Freddie what I thought of the season overall, Freddie apparently said that these two are the most popular characters, or like everybody's fan favorites. Obviously Tyrion, so I knew about that. I knew he was basically one of the standouts. And Daenerys, I didn't really have much exposure to Emilia Clarke before watching this, other than Terminator Genesis, which is not really the best example of anyone's talent. So I didn't really have I didn't really have much feeling one way or another about her. So, but I really found her storyline and the way her character evolved over the 10 episodes from this more passive character who was essentially sold into an arranged marriage by her brother, who, oh man, that guy, I'm so glad that guy died. And he had such a great death scene with the spoilers for Game of Thrones. Obviously not. With the metal being poured on him and the crown. That was really cool. And I really liked seeing Daenerys, or Khaleesi's, evolution over the course of the season, and I'm looking forward to seeing where the subsequent seasons take her. We already have season 2 in hand, thanks again to Freddie for letting us borrow his box sets. And I'll be sure to report back and let you all know what I think of the show as Kai and I get further along. I'm really hoping that I can push out so much of what I've learned as a student of pop culture just from the last 6 years of hearing so much about the show and picking up little bits and pieces of Hodor and Battle of the Bastards and Shame and all of that. But I'm not as enthusiastic a fan as a lot of people are, but I'm only 10 episodes in and definitely curious to see what happens. The finale definitely left me hanging and wanting to see more as soon as possible. Kai and I have already seen the season 2 premiere, and hoping to make more time to get to that very soon. So I'll keep you all posted on that. So without any further delay, let's move into my thoughts or review of The Flash Duet.
What the hell is going on?
You're in a movie musical. Just follow
the yellow brick road?
No, what's wrong with you? No, the script. Follow the script.
Gather the boys, we're going to war.
Although I should mention, if you die in here, you die out there.
All right, so those of you who haven't listened to the past couple episodes, and if you haven't, what are you waiting for? I talked about Moonlight. I talked about Logan. I've basically introduced a new format for the show, where for the central review, for the featured review or the feature presentation, if you will, we have 5 different categories that we run through. And though The Flash Duet is not a film, I'm going to be reviewing it as such, since it is a television event. And since I wanted to talk about Game of Thrones already, I sort of figured that it made sense to basically just make this a television-centric episode of the Crooked Table podcast. So moving forward, we're going to take our first category, the hype. So there was a lot of rumors about a musical crossover episode of The Flash and Supergirl long before it was actually announced. Both Grant Gustin and Melissa Benoist, of course, were on Glee prior to becoming superheroes over on the CW, and I was a fan of both of them on that Fox series, which I mentioned on the podcast in the past. And, considering the standard for musical TV episodes is probably still Buffy, which is a pioneer of these types of shows, I was really interested in the prospect of a musical episode with these actors from the very beginning. Thankfully, the world of comics is so open to story possibilities, much like Buffy, that having The Flash and Supergirl breaking into song doesn't really feel like that much of a stretch. I mean, once you had giant shark man monsters and a bazillion people that know how to run really fast, your suspension of disbelief will be a lot easier to stretch just a little bit further into the musical realm. So when Darren Criss was announced, as I mentioned, being a fan of Glee, I was really excited to see him play the Music Meister. Yeah, part of me was a little disappointed that Neil Patrick Harris wasn't going to be playing the role that he originated on Batman the Brave and the Bold, providing the voice talent there. However, because of Glee and my connection to all 3 of these actors and their past history of singing and dancing on the small screen before, the thought of the 3 of them reuniting on screen was really too good to pass up. Ironically, Gustin and Benoist never really shared any screen time on Glee, but Chris and his character of Blaine shared a lot of screen time with both of them over the course of the show. Of course, he came in season 2, and Gustin played in season 3 and a little bit in 4, whereas Benoist was really 4 and 5. So there was a little bit of overlap with Darren Criss, but not so much with Grant Gustin and Melissa Benoist. So with all the excitement about the Glee turned Arrowverse fans and everything, all the people that you watched that were fans of these actors, like me, on Glee, coming over into the Arrowverse, how did the show pull it off? Like, how did they do? Did it live up to the hype? So that takes us into the story. And these spoilers, we're going to be going full spoilers for this episode. I mean, if you're a hardcore fan of the show, The Flash, or Supergirl, or Glee, probably, you will have watched this episode probably already by now. I saw it on the app a day or two after it aired, just because I have a busy schedule. I didn't have time to sit there on Tuesday night. But I have since watched it on the CW app, and I recommend you guys do that if you haven't watched it before you listen to this episode. So the story was easily the weakest element of the episode, sadly. Duet is episode 17 of Flash Season 3, and it picks up on the end of the previous episode of Supergirl. In that way, it's not really a two-parter. It's similar to the way the 4-part Invasion crossover was not really a 4-part crossover. It was really just Barry showing up for 2 seconds at the end of Supergirl, and then her crossing over into the other 3 shows. And so those of you that were hoping to see a legit crossover involving the full gamut of both casts, that just wasn't in the cards, apparently. From what I've heard, it's something involving the production schedule for Supergirl that they're not really... It's kind of hard for them to pull that off. But, maybe in subsequent seasons they can address that. Make it a little easier for Supergirl to cross over into the other series. Or, as has been heavily rumored, we'll get in Crisis on Infinite Earths, in which they will all exist in the same universe finally. So, first of all, also, those of you hoping to see Music Meister follow suit with previous depictions of the character will definitely be left wanting from this episode. In fact, his powers here barely have to do with music as they once did. Instead, the musical conceit is really pinned on Barry and Kara and their love of musicals, and them dealing with romantic strife in their respective relationships with Iris and Mon-El, and the Music Meister sort of feeding off of their innermost desires to create the illusion that they're trapped in. So instead of having Barry and Kara be sort of hypnotized by the Music Meister, as happened on Batman the Brave and the Bold, they end up pretty much sort of trapped in a basically pretty bland musical romance world, at least from my perspective. It would have been a lot more fun to see Music Meister invade Central City, have them in costume, Flash and Supergirl, have them in costume, trying to stop him from committing crimes, and then being sort of thwarted along the way. However, I think maybe part of why they didn't do that for the Flash might have been because that would have been maybe a little bit too close to what Buffy did, where they didn't have the will to stop themselves from singing. It was sort of a spontaneous thing that then kind of carried over into everyone's individual storyline at that point. But with this episode, we get something a lot more akin to Earth 2 and some of the alternative versions of characters that we've already seen and that we know and love. And the arc for both Barry and Kara here to forgive and cherish the love that they have, again with Iris and Mon-El respectively, really repeats elements that both shows have already addressed in recent weeks. We already had Barry propose to Iris, them fight, them sort of reconcile, and then them sort of break up again, only to reunite, spoilers, by episode's end here. We already saw Kara doubting or feeling like she didn't want to forgive Mon-El for lying to her, and just so you guys know, I do regularly watch both shows, and I am up to date on everything going on both of them, which is why I'm so excited every time Supergirl and Flash cross over. Those shows do have such similar sensibilities, and they do really mesh particularly well. I haven't really gotten into Arrow or Legends thus far, and at this point, with so many TV shows popping up that I'm interested in, it's kind of a question whether or not I will ever really get full bore into those shows the way I have these two. But Kara was already trying to figure out if she wanted to forgive Mon-El or sort of feeling that she was wronged, and almost was quasi-inspired by Wynn forgiving Lyra. And instead of that last scene with her and Mon-El, with her forgiving him and then just proceeding as normal, she stands her ground and then forgives him here because she learned the same lesson because of the Music Meister that she learned by the end of the previous episode of Supergirl with Wynn and Lyra and that whole storyline, which the Wynn-Lyra thing was sort of serving as a parallel to the Kara-Mon-El thing, but here it's just the Barry-Iris thing serving as a parallel to the Kara-Mon-El thing. So that just seemed really repetitive, and I think part of that was by design, so that if people that don't watch The Flash but watch Supergirl, watch the crossover, or vice versa, they didn't feel like they missed anything when they came back to their show. Story-wise, and the narrative sort of functions just as well without if you take the musical episode out, which then to me sort of begs the question, well, why bother doing it then? Why not make it a part of the narrative of both seasons, of both shows' subsequent respective seasons, as opposed to having it be sort of amount to essentially a filler episode? It should have been a fulcrum for both shows, or at least for Barry, if not for Kara. There was, of course, a lot of fun character interactions between the Flash and Supergirl cast. Martian Manhunter's reveal to Team Flash in particular was really fun, and the brief team up between Kid Flash and Martian Manhunter. I really liked the way that Wally's storyline sort of dovetailed into Kara and Barry's, in that it was a bit of a redemption tale, but it wasn't overly it wasn't particularly heavy-handed. It was more subtle, and it was allowed to have its few scenes that it needed to establish itself, but not really take over the show or be competing with the two leads for screen time. But other than those few cool character moments like Caitlin and Cisco's reactions to basically everything, or Mon-El playing off the team, or HR making comments, it did really feel like the overall plot of the Music Meister's plan and the lesson he was trying to teach them, and the world in which Kara and Barry were sort of sucked into was very paper thin, and it made little to no sense upon even a cursory analysis. It just felt like a tremendous, and I told Kai, and I talked about this afterwards, she basically agreed with me, it just felt like a tremendous missed opportunity to create something really special with these two characters. So moving into the cast, thankfully, what does work about the episode is the cast. Gustin and Benoist are infinitely likable, and their chemistry together has never been stronger than it is in this episode. It's really funny to me, and this happens most of the time when they're on screen together, how Barry gets so submissive around someone like Kara. I mean, usually he's a little more of the leader type, but then when she's around, she makes jokes about, oh, I could click my heels together 3 times, and he's like, yeah, you should do that. And then she has to be like, no, I'm kidding. I'm not all powerful. I may be an alien and I may have all these powers that you don't have, but I'm not, I'm not a god to that regard. So it's really funny how that dynamic shifts whenever they're on screen together. And it's no surprise, again, with their Glee experience, it's no surprise that both of them can really sing and dance. Though it did really bug me that Grant Gustin takes forever to finally take part in the musical side of things. It's not until the Super Friend number that I think is 2/3 of the way through the episode where he even sings more than a bar or so, and that was frustrating. I mean, we get Kara singing in the opening number of the show, basically, while the credits are still running, and Barry barely sings until the show is like kind of reaching the third act. It was, as far as the other cast members, Chris Wood really meshed pretty easily with Danielle Pennebaker and Carlos Valdez, and of course Candice Patton continues to be the heart of the show, the Flash, I'm saying, obviously. In many ways, this was a big episode for West Allen shippers like me out there, and I'll get to that in a little bit more when I talk about the music in a second. But it was that their love story has always really been one of the major through lines on The Flash that's really emotionally grounded me to the show, as well as, Joe's parental guidance to both characters, actually, and Wally. But the West Allen aspect of this show has always been one of the ones that I've felt the most drawn into on just a human storytelling level, in addition to all the over-the-top comic book stuff that is so much fun to watch. As far as the episode's many guest stars, Criss was really spirited in his turn as the Music Meister. There were little flickers of Blaine's kind of bravado that he weaved into his performance here, but he didn't really have nearly enough screen time. In fact, he barely sang or danced in here, save for the one group number that I'll mention in a little bit here. It just felt like the show was trying to squeeze too many Arrowverse actors into this episode, based on the fact that they can sing in real life, and having little regard for whether or not it actually made sense for them to narratively play a part in the story at hand. Of course, though, it's kind of hard to deny stage veterans like John Barrowman, Victor Garber, Jesse L. Martin the spotlight that they're so great at, and they're so magnetic, and they have such rich voices. But to me, honestly, the biggest surprise was Jeremy Jordan and Carlos Valdez, as of course Win and Cisco. And I knew they could sing going into this. I'd heard that Jeremy Jordan was in the cast of Newsies at one point, the Broadway revival, I believe, and that Carlos Valdez was one of the original Star Kids with Criss. So that's pretty neat that there was another reunion a little bit there for them. But they really brought such showmanship to their number and elevated the material that they were given. They had such great voices that even though I knew they could sing, I hadn't heard them sing. So actually seeing them in this episode, considering that they're sort of like the best friends of their respective heroes. I feel like I'm saying respective a lot. I have to watch that. Sorry about that. It was fun to see them partnered up in this episode with that number and actually have a sequence all to themselves. Also, not enough Tom Cavanaugh in this episode. Unfortunately, there's never enough Tom Cavanaugh. I mean, since season 1, when Harrison Wells was ultimately revealed to be the big bad, spoilers for Flash, I guess. Every season he's been a joy to watch, and every time HR utters anything in any episode this season, it's been a lot of. It's been with that over enthusiastic, wanting to be helpful but also getting in the way vibe that this particular version of Harrison Wells has brought to the show. So it would have been fun for me to see a little more Tom Cavanaugh, possibly even singing. Maybe down the line we'll get another one, and we'll talk about that in a second. So going into the production. So for those of you who haven't listened to my last couple episodes on Logan and Moonlight using this format, the production to me is basically a catch-all category that delves into, whatever parts of the production stood out to me, either were egregiously good or egregiously bad, whatever, that could be the visual effects, that could be the art direction, that could be the score, blah, 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 whatever. So for this episode, obviously this is a musical, so let's focus in on what really sets this one apart, the music. Unlike the Buffy musical episode, and I don't mean to compare it to that, but anytime any of these shows has a musical episode, let's be honest, we're always comparing it to Buffy, to Once More with Feeling, and how great that episode is, and how it pushes all those stories forward, and how the music was so catchy. I have the soundtrack that I listened to. I haven't listened to in a while, actually, so I might have to bust that out. But unlike Buffy, this episode, Duet didn't really rely on entirely original music. So, while it's great hearing Benoist's lovely version of Moon River or the aforementioned Win Cisco number, Put a Little Love in Your Heart, which always makes me just think of Scrooge. Whenever I hear it, I just picture Bill Murray being like, "Feed me, Seymour, feed me." Am I the only one? Send me a tweet at Crooked Table. Let me know if your mind just kept going back to Scrooge. Even though I know the song existed before that. That number was fun. The song selections really, though, for the most part, barely related to the story at hand. It felt to me like one of the weaker episodes of Glee. And I'm making another comparison, but our three major characters here were all Glee alums, so sorry people, it's going to happen. It felt like the weaker episodes of Glee, in which a song is shoehorned into an episode to fit a theme, rather than the theme sort of organically coming off of the the musical episodes, or rather than the songs being selected because they communicate something about the characters. There's really no theme in sight here. There's just a random mishmash of well-performed, though momentum-killing tunes. There were 2 original songs at play, and no surprise, they were actually probably the ones that related to the story the most, and probably the 2 of the more successful ones for me personally. So we had Super Friend, which was co-written by the CW's own Rachel Bloom of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and Runnin' Home to You, which I'll get into more depth in a second. So the former one is, of course, the duet between Barry and Kara, in which the 2 playfully profess their friendship for one another, complete with a dig at Superman that should really make those inevitable Justice League meetings pretty awkward, if you ask me, between Flash and Superman. So let's hope that he never hears about this. But since I'm not really familiar with Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, despite the positive things I've heard about it, the style of the song was really jarring to me, especially when you put it after more classical songs like Moon River or the Guys and Dolls number that the veteran Broadway performers carried out like midway through the episode. The style here didn't really mesh with anything, and it felt kind of out of nowhere. The jokey, like sing-songy, like talky way that the quirky humor brought from it. Even though it fit those characters, had the show opened and established that tone right out the gate, the song, that number might have worked for me better. But like I said, there is no connective tissue behind the music here. We get a sense that Moon River was basically only picked because Benoist sings it really well, for example. And the fact that Gustin didn't sing a bar really until Super Friend made it a little bit of a too little, too late for me, personally. So, however, Running Home to You completely floored me. I've always thought Gustin had a solid voice. All of us that watch Glee definitely remember his debut number on the show, which I think was a Smooth Criminal duet with Naya Rivera Santana. And I always thought he had a solid voice, but he really brought his game up here, and it's making me reconsider his talent as a vocalist. The fact that he sings it right before he proposes to Iris, and I know yes again, despite the fact that was, again, sort of repetitive storytelling, it made the moment really that much more memorable for me personally, being a huge West Allen shipper. Like I said, the Barry-Iris love story is easily the strongest across the entire Arrowverse. And the metaphor of running home to you and he runs fast, I thought that was really elegantly handled in the songwriting itself. So later on, when I did research after watching the episode, and I found out that one was actually written by Benj Pasek and Justin Paul, who just won an Oscar for their songwriting work on City of Stars for La La Land, another film that I've talked about quite a bit recently on here. Looking that up really made it clear why that song was such a standout for me. And yes, I did buy it on iTunes, and yes, I do love it. And it's definitely was the moment from that episode that I'll remember the most, and the song that I'll probably revisit the most. The fact that it's the only one that does not take place in that goofy, like 1940s, 1920s, whatever style musical movie bullshit that they were caught up in, really, I think, says a lot about the fact that whole premise did not really work for me at all. And I just wish that they had taken a totally different approach with it. So moving into the verdict, overall, Duet was a really fun episode. It did fail to deliver on the promise that it was set out by the concept of doing a musical episode with these actors from across the Arrowverse, but specifically the 2 who are Glee alum. The cast does what they can with a pretty weak story and a very mixed bag of musical selections, but still the charm of Gustin, Benoist, and their respective supporting casts makes it enjoyable enough to serve as a decent enough respite from the heavier storylines happening on both shows right now. I mean, I'm talking specifically about the looming threat of Savitar and, Iris's potential death. The Flash has been, I don't know if I'd say a touch darker than Season 2, but certainly darker than most of Season 1. But Duet kind of gives a nice break from the more serialized storytelling that the shows, both of them, normally are engaged in, as they jump into the final stretch of episodes here in the coming weeks. With any luck, Duet will perform well enough in the ratings, and I haven't checked on them, but I think that's damn near guaranteed at this point, considering the Flash audience, the Supergirl audience, and the Glee audience that will be turning in to watch Darren Criss sing, share the screen with his former co-stars here. But hopefully the ratings are strong enough that Darren Criss can come back as the Music Meister and return to wreak some more musical havoc next season. Or, if this becomes a regular thing, I would be fine with that. Let's just hope that when that does happen, the creative team behind the episode takes a bit more time on the story behind it all, and is a little more careful of the songs that they select or the songs that they write. Maybe going all original next time might be a better way to go, since those two numbers were the ones that stood out to me the most. Just having Barry and Kara not even really be Barry and Kara and singing songs that we've heard elsewhere, it does not cut it, especially for an episode that had this much hype behind it. And it was decent, but ultimately a bit of a letdown for me. For the episode as a whole, I'd probably have to go about 3 out of 5, which is solid, but sort of unremarkable. And considering all the promise that they had here and everything that this could have been, it's a mild disappointment on my end. Still very much invested in both shows, still optimistic about their season finales and where they can take this going forward, bringing Music Meister back again and improving upon this. But those are just my thoughts on Duet as a standalone episode. So that's all for my thoughts on The Flash Duet. Just to give you guys an idea of what I'm going to be getting into next week. I was initially actually planning on talking about some Power Rangers stuff this week, but considering that next episode, seeing the Flash musical and realizing I had more thoughts about it than I expected to, and the fact that I will then have seen Power Rangers, the new Power Rangers film, by the time I record the next episode, we're basically going to have a Power Rangers extravaganza in the next episode. We're going to be focusing on, of course, a similarly formatted review of Power Rangers 2017, as well as my thoughts and sort of run through of a retrospective on the original episode of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers from 1993. That's right, folks. We're talking Day of the Dumpster and Rita Repulsa and Goldar and all their cheesy, ridiculous early 90s glory. So that should be a lot of fun. Those of you that want to catch up on some of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers stuff, they seem to have most of the Power Rangers series, not just the original, but the different incarnations of it, on Netflix. I just streamed Day of the Dumpster from there. So if you want to look into some of that and maybe watch that episode before I record the next episode, then you can sort of have it fresh in your mind as I discuss it. And then the following week, I'm actually planning a kind of an extra special episode that I'm currently brainstorming right now, and I'd rather not speak of it just yet because I'm trying to figure out exactly what specifically I want to talk about. But definitely keep checking for that. As you can tell from the last few episodes, I'm trying to keep this on a regular weekly schedule. Posting on Fridays seems to work for me right now. And if that changes, obviously I will mention it on here and try and target something that's a little more efficient for me. Schedules might be changing in the next couple weeks between me and Kai and our work situations and all that. So definitely stay tuned to some really interesting stuff coming up on the Crooked Table podcast in the near future. As for now, if you want to follow me on Twitter at Crooked Table, you can find the Crooked Table on Facebook. I'm also on Tumblr. I'm also on Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm also on pretty much you name it, I'm on it. And if I'm not on it, send me a tweet at Crooked Table and be like, "Hey, man, why are you not on this one?" And then I'll make an account and I'll be on there too. So let me know what you think of this episode. What did you think of the Flash musical episode with Supergirl? Did it live up to your expectations? Did you also feel like it was a bit of a letdown, or am I alone here? Recording a podcast into the void. Let me know what you think of that. What do you want to hear me talk about next time? or not next time. I already told you what I'm talking about next time. What you want to hear me talk about in subsequent episodes. I'm always open to your feedback, and I really appreciate you listening to this. So I'll see you next week. Until then, roll credits.
This has been a production of CrookedTable.com. All rights reserved.
CROOKED.